welcome to AOD Media Watch. The media play an important role in public debate on drug policy. AODmediawatch.com.au is run by researchers and clinicians who work in the field and who want to see an improvement in the way drug issues are reported. By providing critical engagement on poor reporting, dominated by misinformation, moral panic and stigma, but also celebrating examples of good journalism, AOD Media Watch puts focus back onto the most important question about drug policy. What does effective drug policy look like? Anyone can submit a story at aodmediawatch.com.au of either good or bad examples of drug journalism. If you are a journalist or you want to report effectively on drug issues, check out the page's resources and guidelines for journalists at the website. My name's Nick, and in this episode, AOD Media Watch expert reviewers Dr. Stephen Bright and Dr. Liam Engel from Edith Cowan University chat with author and columnist Katie Hornshaw about her piece, Are You a Vulnerable Celebrity? Why Not Try Meth with the 7 Network? This piece looks at a Channel 7 news special called Coming Clean, focus on AFL player Ben Cousins and his very public struggle with drugs. It first aired on Channel 7 on Sunday, the 29th of March 2020, and was hosted by TV presenter and sports commentator Basil Zempalis. Ben Cousins is a former professional AFL player, widely recognised and highly awarded for his talent in the game. October 2007, his contract was terminated due to ongoing issues surrounding his recreational drug use. In 2017, he received a 12-month prison sentence for a variety of offences. Less than 1 month after the airing of Channel 7's piece in March 2020, Cousins was again arrested, allegedly possessing 2.5 grams of methamphetamine. You can read Are You a Vulnerable Celebrity? Why Not Try Meth with the 7 Network at aodmediawatch.com.au.
Fairly late last night on all news websites that Ben Cousins had been stopped in a car that was driving erratically. They searched the car, found methamphetamine, and he's been arrested for possession.
Ben Cousins' latest trouble with the law began when he was paid a huge sum for a television interview, according to his lawyer. The fallen footballer's ex-partner allegedly tried to get some of the money, and now he's facing stalking and drug possession charges.
They've given somebody who's got a known substance use issue a lot of money to do this interview. What did forget about the interview itself. That would have been, we don't know how long ago the interview happened, but even the airing of it, like you were saying in your piece, Katie, how would have he felt watching that on TV?
What you're about to watch is a documentary we started making in early 2008. At that stage, I didn't know where it would lead, but I thought it was important to have a record of the things that were happening to me. I understand that some of the footage you see in this film is very troubling, and it doesn't always depict me in the best light. But I feel there's some real lessons to be learned here, and I think some good can come from it for everyone.
7 opened with footage of Ben Cousins from 10 years ago. He's clearly media trained, very polished, makeup on, staring straight at the camera, absolutely poster boy, and speaking about his struggles with addiction. They then cut from that and then dramatically cut to Ben Cousins now, who the difference could not be more stark. To me, it seemed the whole point of it was to go, look how bad he looks, look how different he looks. And then as if that wasn't rubbed in enough, they immediately make several comments about Cousins going from a big star to, as Basil Zempalis puts it at one stage,
Brownlow to Garbo inside jail.
Right from the start, it flags what sort of program this is going to be. They're not going to make any real attempt to educate the public or to try to minimise some of the harms around addiction. In that way, I don't think they can really call it a documentary. And what they are going to do is put the spotlight on the most humiliating aspects of Ben's fall from grace in recent years. And obviously, in doing so, 7 clearly associates using methamphetamine as being a guaranteed one-way ticket to hell. They imply over and over again that the reason that this has happened to Ben is because he used methamphetamine. There's no clarification whatsoever that those two things, Ben's trajectory and the meth are two separate things. They're always regarded throughout the whole documentary as one, the meth caused the downward trajectory of Ben's life.
You look different.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
So the ponytail, the beard, there's nothing more to it than that? It's not an act of defiance or something like that?
No.
So much of the time that substances can lead people to end up in a position that they're struggling has got little to do with the substances themselves and a lot to do with the way that person perceives themselves, the way other people perceive them. If you have in your head, I'm taking ice, this is a one-way ticket to hell, this is going to, ruin my life. Well, obviously it's much more likely to happen because that's the way you're thinking about it, that's the way society thinks about it.
It's positive reinforcement, right? People become the label that you give them, and if the only label available to you is that you're a meth zombie, then it's impossible for you to become anything else.
And I think one of the reasons that meth and heroin do actually have higher rates of addiction for people who try them in the first place, although they're nowhere near what people think, obviously, but they do have higher rates compared to some other substances. The type of person who is going to try that substance in the first place has almost already said to themselves, well, I know that, once you try one of these substances, you're going to get addicted and there's no other place that you're going to end up. So it's almost like by the time they try that substance, they're already sort of presupposing that themselves.
It's been framed as an instrument of self-harm. So people go out and use the instrument of self-harm.
Are you still using drugs?
No. And,
So I'm clear. Can you tell me 100% you're not using drugs anymore?
Well, it's I'm sort of thinking I'm going to answer that.
Throughout the program, Basil Zemplis and the 7 producers imply that Ben, because of his quote-unquote choice to continue to use meth, that makes him essentially immoral and selfish. And they don't come right out and say that, but that's obviously the implication. He is asked over and over and over again whether he is still using. Every time he's asked, he struggles to answer directly.
Can you tell us categorically, Ben, have you used drugs in this time?
No.
It's obvious that he feels extremely uncomfortable with the question and doesn't want to engage with it. And despite that, he is asked again and again. And Basil Zemplis is so clearly trying to get that gotcha moment. And, at one stage says, it's a simple question, almost aggressively to Ben, to just desperately trying to get him. Clearly they want him to admit, yes, I am still using. And then Basil also asks, why didn't you stop?
Why didn't what happened to Maney shock you straight?
Well, it did, I think. Yeah, it did.
But you used drugs again after his death?
The implication again and again is, A, that Ben Cousins had a choice and has chosen to continue to use or to not recover, and B, by making that choice, that he is a worse person than he would be if he made the choice to be, as they refer to it in the documentary, clean. It makes Seven's position on addiction pretty clear. They obviously believe that someone can simply choose to recover if they want to, and that by contrast, if someone is still using, that they must have made a choice to keep using, and that they must simply be refusing to recover. I wholly disagree with this characterization of addiction, although I believe that everybody has free will, and obviously people to some extent have power over their own choices. I think that there are hundreds of socio-cultural and economic factors that get in the way of that wish, and that even if they try, that hamper their ability to continue with that. Things like poverty, they might not have the money to spend on expensive rehabs, lack of access to the right types of services to help them recover.
When was the last time you used drugs?
It's just one of those things. I'd rather not go there. I don't think it helps.
Last week, last month?
Well, not today. And that's got to be enough for me, and it should be enough for other people.
A lot of people are incredibly afraid to go and ask for help or access help in the first place because they're afraid of being judged. And as we can see with Ben's particular situation, this is probably a huge factor for him because he's famous. He knows what he's going to encounter when he comes into treatment facilities. Everybody knows him. So there's that judgment factor. There's the fact of it then might be reported in the media that, oh, Ben's trying to get help. And then if he fails again, that's looked at as a failure. I thought it was incredibly unhelpful and just willfully ignorant of Seven to continually throughout this documentary represent recovery as something that Ben could choose to do if he wanted to, but he just is such a terrible person that he chooses not to. This sort of representation encourages stigmatising attitudes in the community, not just for Ben Cousins, but for people watching the program. If they already have a belief that, say, they have a loved one or a sister or a brother who is using some sort of substance, and they believe that that person is just using due to their own choice, well, this cements that view and cements that type of stigmatising attitudes.
A lot of people would say, oh, well, I'm pretty strong. I should be able to manage that. But the reality is, doesn't matter who you are, if you use it often enough, you will become addicted to it. It is that sort of substance. It's a very powerfully addictive substance.
If you think about the narrative that this piece is providing about people who use methamphetamine and people who use drugs, and they're really buying into this stereotype that Katie was describing as kind of like a downward spiral, whether or not that is the case, the implications of kind of spreading that as a message about drugs is kind of making it happen again, right? What are the positive messages about drugs? Because if we don't speak about the positive messages about drugs, it's impossible for people to learn about them and to have those experiences. If you were a young person using methamphetamine and you watch this documentary, what are you going to think of yourself? Probably not very good things. If you're serious about, helping the drug problem, I think a key thing that you need to do is provide positive message about drugs. And I think if you ask Ben the right questions, he probably could say how methamphetamine has helped him, and it probably, in this terrible time in his life, especially if he has ADHD, meth might be something he needs. Maybe not, but it should be considered.
I need to take some Dexies and stuff like that because there's some things about my personality or character that before I picked up any gear or whatever that need to be managed. I don't want to be off my head. It's not to get off my head or whatever. It's just to function. Do you understand? Like it's to function. To function. I just want to be to lead a normal life. I'm not asking to take. I don't want to take 25 of them.
So it's not that you want to line up a rack of coke tonight. It's not a party thing anymore.
No, I don't party like I don't do it. I just want to be normal.
From a mental health perspective, and from my experience as a psychologist, Ben's lived most of his life under public scrutiny, and we know that that's difficult. We've seen celebrities come undone as a result of the pressure that comes with being in the public light, and you know, being unwell in terms of having mental health issues is hard enough. Dealing and managing with that, and dual diagnosis with comorbid mental illness is difficult enough to do on your own, let alone doing it in the public light. Ben's pretty much been the poster child for the anti-drug message. And so throughout, the narrative is that the reason Ben has gone from AFL football star to Garbo in prison is because of the methamphetamine. No other things are taken into consideration. Nothing's taken into consideration in terms of the social factors, in terms of being in the public light, his family history, his genetics. In my opinion, it was unethical to go ahead with a number of the interviews conducted, but particularly the interview that was conducted in the car.
To get him to come over, I was going to give him my Brownlow to mediate. It was that's how big a thing it was, you know, and say, listen, we need, because this is not going to get dealt with in the courts. I was going to say, I'll give you that if you can come over and mediate this, and I want somebody to tell her that if I'm allowed to see my kids, I get to see them. I said, I've missed half of my kids' lives. I promise you that if I miss all of it, if I get to a point where I don't think I can come back, I promise you I'm going to turn and I'm going to pick a cause, and I'm going to come single-mindedly at that cause or with that cause towards you, anybody, everything, and I want there to be carnage. Blood will spill. So it's up to you guys if you want to change this. You know, and I'm one person, but it's happening to a lot more than just me. Something's got to happen. The jail is half full of people in exactly my situation. Half. And all of them say the same thing.
It's unclear whether he was drug affected, whether he was maybe experiencing a hypomanic state, but he was clearly agitated. And not only should have the interview not gone ahead, it should certainly not have aired. It was not in the public's interest for that footage to have aired because of the implications it has in terms of perceptions of fathers and custody issues. And more so, it's incriminating. It actually Ben makes idle threats that potentially incriminate him, and so that certainly shouldn't have aired. It was unethical to air that. When he was in the park, he was talking about his ADHD.
I'm on the Dexys all the gear. I told you that. Yeah. I want the Dexys, so I'm not on the gear. And I said, if you don't give me the Dexys, I am going to be on the gear.
But when you're on the Dexys, you're not on the gear?
No.
Dexys calm you down.
And the gear. I just thank the Lord that I've got it. You know, I would probably kill my mum, you know. Well, I say that, but you know what I mean? Someone close to me would have
Well, if you weren't on gear, gear calms you down.
Of course it
does. Like meth calms you down, ice calms you down. I thought it calms you, it puts you up, not calms you down.
Of course it calms me down. That's what it does.
Look, I don't know whether he's got ADHD or not. As a psychologist, I can't make that diagnosis based on some TV footage and, you know, what I know about Ben Cousins. I'd need to sit with him for a couple of hours and speak with him and gather all the history and information around that. But the way they dismissed it, ADHD is a serious mental health condition, and people that do experience ADHD often experience problems with substance use. It's a very common comorbidity. And like Ben said, people that have ADHD will often use, in fact, they're often prescribed amphetamine as a way to calm them. It doesn't really calm them. It turns on the prefrontal cortex. It allows them to concentrate. It allows them to control their impulses a bit better. And I think what we saw in the car was him coming undone because he wasn't able to control his impulses. He wasn't able to self-regulate, which is a sign of ADHD. And so, you know, as a researcher and as a clinician, the way in which the journalists engaged with Ben was unethical because it wasn't empathic. They weren't really looking for his side of the story. What they were looking for was those gotcha moments. They were doing it in a way that was confrontational, that threatened his autonomy. And every time they threatened his autonomy, you could see him push back. And that's the reason why. The journalists that were involved in these interviews, Basil, the interview in the car, the interview at the park, I could use this in my course to demonstrate this is not how you interact with another human being. I teach counselling skills to undergraduate and postgraduate students, and the journalists in this piece did every single thing that I tell them not to do when interacting with somebody.
When you can't see Bobby and Angela, what are the things that you miss?
Well, it's just, you know, what do I miss?
You weren't there for your kids because you went to jail because you made threatening and abusive calls, and a lot of them.
Yeah, at the time, I certainly wasn't aware of or understood the impact that I was having on people around me.
Because you were affected by drugs at the time?
Well, just caught up in the emotion of the situation.
I think as journalists, we want to make our stories as resonant as possible. We dress our language up and we try to make it as impactful as possible. But you just can't do that. When you're talking about addiction, you have to really stick to the facts and provide that balance, use person-first language. You know, if you're wanting to do a really out there, impactful language story, it needs to be about something else, because this can affect people's lives.
We can't sugarcoat it though. You weren't there for your kids because you went to jail because you made threatening and abusive calls, and a lot of them.
Yeah, at the time, I certainly wasn't aware of or understood the impact that I was having on people around me.
Because you were affected by drugs at the time?
Well, just caught up in the emotion of the situation.
If you're doing a story about drug addiction or substance dependency, interview people who have had lived experience, interview people who have had dependence on substances, or even better, who are currently dependent on substances. Because without seeing these people and without hearing their voices, what other tool do people have but to assume that the stereotyping and the stigmatizing attitudes and is you know, that's how they're going to perceive people who use drugs, because that's how they're portrayed and they don't see otherwise in their daily lives. So I think that to me is really important, really important.
How do you think the 7-piece contributes to people wanting to speak about their lived experience?
In that way, it was just absolutely shameful. If you are someone with lived experience and the media were to contact you after seeing that piece, I mean, what are you going to say?
Like you said, Katie, obviously it's a great idea to interview people with lived experience about drugs. The gold standard to go even above that would be to give them a role as a producer or a director. That's how I see, you know, the gold standard of drug research. It's the research that has people who use drugs as co-researchers that lead the project. Because if you don't have those people having, you know, their opinion front and centre, or their perspective front and centre, then it's going to get lost. And it's exactly the same way we research mental health. It's exactly the same way we research Indigenous people. When you're dealing with people that are discriminated, you need to make the whole purpose of your project what they need, because it's ultimately, it's not even about the story or about the research. It's about power redistribution. And that's what the issue is.
So the Mindframes guidelines for reporting on alcohol and other drugs are part of an ongoing evolution to help support the media to communicate about alcohol and other drug issues more effectively and to prevent harm from that communication. So it started with guidelines that were developed by the Australian National Council on Drugs, and there were some basic guidelines that were actually endorsed by the Australian Press Council. So the Australian Press Council is the industry regulated body. So it's a bit like the way Drinkwise regulates the alcohol industry. The Australian Press Council regulates what we read, what we see, etc. One of the limitations with the Australian Press Council is because they're an industry regulated body, it can be difficult for them to take action sometimes. So they have general principles that were referred to in this particular piece. So they have principles around reporting things that are in the public interest. They have principles around accuracy. And some of the things that the Mindframes principles provide guidance around are just really elaborations of those pre-existing basic principles of journalism by the Australian Press Council. So following the Australian National Council on Drugs developing these guidelines, they were defunded by the Abbott government. In 2016, Alcohol and Other Drug Media Watch launched, and as part of our objectives, we wanted to provide guidance to not only journalists but consumers and experts who are engaging in the media. And we developed some guidelines that elaborated on those earlier guidelines, pointing out the importance of accuracy, the harms that can occur when the media create moral panics, the importance of having balance when reporting on stories, so talking about the good things as well as the less good things, and also getting everybody's side of the story, avoiding stereotyping. And that's then evolved into the Mind Frames guidelines, which provide some basic principles about communicating about people who use drugs, to avoid using stigmatizing language, using person-first language, not referring to people as addicts, for example, because that's labeling somebody. That's not helpful. They provide some tips for communicating about alcohol and other drugs in a more helpful way, such as, ensuring there's accuracy of the information presented, ensuring that they get experts involved in the piece. And they also mention harmful ways that the media can engage with discussions around alcohol and other drugs, particularly through sensationalism, which we saw in this story. And what they are trying to do is ensure that the language that's used doesn't perpetuate stigma, because we know that stigma and the internalisation of stigma reduces help-seeking behaviour. And what Mind Frames essentially want to do, they've done this for the past 20 years with mental health, is ensure that the media's reporting leads to increased help-seeking behaviour. And part of that involves letting people know that, look, here's the number for Lifeline. If this story has upset you or you want somebody to talk to, here's a phone number that you can call and here's somebody you can talk to. And so Mind Frames would like to see the media do this with reporting on alcohol and other drugs as well, so that at the end of a story, there's information for people who have watched it that would like to seek some support, and provides them with some direction on how they might actually seek that support.
If you're in Victoria and you or someone you know is seeking assistance with an alcohol or other drug-related matter, contact Direct Line on 1800 888 236 or visit directline.org.au. Direct Line offer confidential alcohol and drug counselling and referral in Victoria, are a free service and are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Visit their website, directline.org.au, or call 1800 888 236. You've been hearing from expert reviewers Dr. Stephen Bright, Senior Lecturer of Addiction at Edith Cowan University, and Dr. Liam Engel, Adjunct Research Fellow at Edith Cowan University, alongside author and columnist Katie Hornshaw, who wrote a piece for AODmediawatch.com.au entitled, "Are You a Vulnerable Celebrity? Why Not Try Meth with the 7 Network?" Katie's piece focused on a Channel 7 special on former AFL footballer Ben Cousins, called Coming Clean. Stay in touch with AOD Media Watch at the website aodmediawatch.com.au. Find them on social media or sign up for their mailing list. Thank you to everyone who helped put this together, and to you for taking the time to watch. I'm Nick, and you can hear me talking drug policy on Encyclopedia every Sunday at 2 p.m. on Melbourne's 3CR Community Radio. The show is also available as a podcast at the Encyclopedia program page on 3cr.org.au. Drug policy can and does change for the better, though prohibition is firmly entrenched in our current global order and our local politics. You can help to change that by engaging with projects like aodmediawatch.com.au and building a better discussion on what effective drug policy looks like.
One of the objectives of AOD Media Watch is to give people in the field more confidence to speak to the media, because not enough people have the confidence. They'll say no, they won't do these interviews. We've got guidelines for people on how they should approach the media when the media approaches them. And I'll always go back to that point. Well, if I don't do this interview, who's going to do it? If they don't agree to these interviews, they're just going to fill the void with somebody else that they claim is an expert. So I think it's really important that we encourage people through AOD Media Watch to speak to the media, be it consumers, be it experts, but people need to do it, with their eyes wide open.